The sun dipped below the horizon in the quiet town of Willow Creek, casting long shadows across the streets. In a quaint, two-story house on Oakwood Lane, a golden retriever named Max sat alert, his ears perked as he stared intently at the storm drain in the corner of the yard. Max had been a part of the Harper family for 6 years, ever since little Emma turned 3. He was her protector, her confidant, and her best friend. But lately, Max had been acting strange. Every evening at precisely 7 p.m., he would wander to the back of the yard and sit by the storm drain. He'd stare at it, motionless, as if expecting something or someone to emerge. "Max, what are you doing?" Emma asked one evening as she followed him outside. She was 9 now, her curiosity as boundless as ever. She crouched next to him, peering into the shadows of the drain. "There's nothing there, silly boy." But Max didn't move. His eyes remained fixed, his body tense. Emma's father, David, watched from the porch, his brow furrowed. "What's he up to?" he asked, glancing at his wife, Sarah, who was setting plates on the dinner table. "I don't know," Sarah replied, her voice tinged with concern. "He's been doing this for a week now. It's odd." That night, after Emma had gone to bed, David and Sarah sat together in the living room, the soft hum of the television filling the silence. "Maybe we should check it out," Sarah said. Breaking the quiet. David shook his head. "It's probably nothing. Maybe he's just curious about a squirrel or something." But Sarah wasn't convinced. Max was no ordinary dog. His instincts were sharp, and his behavior now felt deliberate, almost urgent. The next morning, Emma came running into the kitchen, her face pale. "Mom, Dad, I heard something coming from the drain." Sarah knelt down, brushing a strand of Emma's hair from her face. "What did you hear, sweetheart?" "It sounded like crying," Emma whispered. "Like a baby." David exchanged a look with Sarah. "We'll check it out," he promised. But none of them could have imagined what they were about to uncover. Later that day, David called his friend Mark, who worked for the town's public works department. When Mark arrived, he brought along tools and a flashlight, his expression skeptical yet curious. "This should only take a few minutes," Mark said, kneeling by the storm drain. "Probably just a raccoon or a stray cat." The Harper family gathered nearby, Max sitting at Emma's feet, his gaze fixed on the drain as if urging Mark to hurry. Mark pried the cover open and shone his flashlight inside. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing damp concrete walls and a shallow trickle of water. At first, there was nothing. But then, "Wait," Mark muttered, leaning closer. "Did you hear that?" Everyone held their breath. A faint sound echoed from the drain, soft, almost imperceptible. But as they listened, it grew clearer. It was a cry. "Is that a baby?" Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Mark's face paled. "It can't be," he whispered. But the sound continued, fragile and haunting, tugging at their hearts. Mark adjusted his flashlight, his hand trembling. Deep within the drain, just beyond the beam's reach, something moved. A tiny figure emerged, huddled and shivering in the cold. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, tears filling her eyes. "It is a baby." Mark acted quickly, lowering himself into the drain with a harness. The air was damp and stale. The narrow space pressing in around him. "It's okay," he said softly, his voice echoing. "I'm here to help." The baby, no older than a year, was wrapped in a tattered blanket, its tiny face streaked with dirt. It whimpered, its wide eyes filled with fear. Mark reached out gently, cradling the child in his arms. Above, Sarah and Emma watched anxiously. "Please be careful," Sarah called, her voice breaking. Mark climbed back up, the baby held securely to his chest. As he emerged, the Harper family crowded around, their emotions overwhelming. Sarah wrapped the baby in a warm blanket, her maternal instincts kicking in. "Who would leave a child down there?" she whispered, her voice shaking. Emma knelt beside Max, hugging him tightly. "You knew," she said softly, her voice filled with awe. "You knew someone needed help." Max barked once, as if confirming her words. But even as relief washed over them, questions lingered. Who was this child? How had they ended up in the drain? And what kind of danger had they been left to face? The baby's cries softened as Sarah gently cradled him in her arms, wrapping him in a warm towel she'd fetched from the house. Emma stood close by, her small hands clutching Max's fur as though he were the anchor to this storm of emotions. David quickly dialed 911, his voice firm but edged with urgency. "We found a baby, yes, in a storm drain behind our house. Please send an ambulance and an officer. The child seems unharmed, but we're not sure of his condition." The minutes that followed felt like hours. The baby whimpered softly, his tiny fingers curling around Sarah's. "Sure, it's okay," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You're safe now." When the ambulance and police arrived, the quiet suburban backyard became a hub of activity. Paramedics carefully examined the baby, confirming he was malnourished but otherwise unharmed. The officers began questioning the Harpers and Mark. "How did you know to check the drain?" one officer asked, his notepad in hand. David glanced at Max, who sat nearby, his golden eyes watching intently. "Our dog. He's been acting strangely all week, sitting by the drain, staring at it every evening. It was like he knew someone was down there." The officer raised an eyebrow but made a note. "Animals can sense things we don't," he said simply. As the baby was loaded into the ambulance, Emma tugged at Sarah's sleeve. "Mom," she whispered, "what's going to happen to him now?" Sarah knelt beside her daughter, brushing a tear from Emma's cheek. "He's going to get the care he needs, sweetheart. The police will find out who he is and make sure he's safe." But even as Sarah spoke, a heavy weight settled in her chest. Who would leave a child in such a place? And why? The next morning, the Harpers awoke to find their quiet street buzzing with reporters. News of the abandoned baby had spread, and the family's role in the rescue had made them the focus of attention. David opened the door to find a local journalist on the porch, her notepad ready. "Mr. Harper, can you tell us more about how you found the baby?" "It was our dog, Max," David said, glancing down at the retriever, who stood faithfully at his side. "He wouldn't leave the storm drain alone. If it weren't for him, I don't know if anyone would have found the baby in time." The reporter nodded, jotting down notes. "And do you have any idea who the child might belong to?" David shook his head. "None. We're just hoping the police can figure that out." Inside, Emma sat with Sarah at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of cocoa. "Mom," she asked quietly, "do you think the baby will be okay?" "I hope so," Sarah replied, her voice soft. "But there's still so much we don't know." Just then, the phone rang. Sarah answered, her expression turning serious as she listened. "Thank you for letting us know," she said before hanging up. "What is it?" David asked, stepping inside. Sarah's face was pale. "The police called. They don't have any leads on the baby's identity. No reports of a missing child that match his description." David frowned. "So he's alone?" "For now," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "But they're still investigating." As the Harpers grappled with the mystery, Max remained a constant presence, his quiet vigilance a reminder of the remarkable events that had brought them to this moment. 3 days later, just as the Harpers were starting to lose hope for answers, the phone rang again. This time, it was Officer Daniels, the lead investigator on the case. "We've identified the baby," he said, his voice grave. Sarah gripped the phone tightly. "Who is he? Does he have family?" Officer Daniels sighed. "The child's name is Noah. He's only 8 months old. His parents, they're both missing. Neighbors reported hearing arguments recently. And the house was found ransacked. There's no sign of where they might be, but it looks like foul play." Sarah's heart sank. "You think he was abandoned because of that?" "It's possible," Daniels admitted. "We're still piecing it together. But for now, Noah is in the care of Child Protective Services. They're trying to find a relative who can take him in." When Sarah hung up, her hands trembled. She relayed the information to David and Emma, her voice heavy with emotion. "So he's all alone?" Emma whispered, her wide eyes filling with tears. David knelt beside her, his hands resting on her small shoulders. "Not forever, sweetie. The police and CPS will make sure he's taken care of." But Emma wasn't convinced. That night, as she lay in bed with Max curled up at her feet, she whispered, "We can't let him be alone, Maximum. We have to help him." The next morning, Sarah found Emma sitting at the kitchen table, a determined look on her face. "Mom," Emma began, "can we take care of Noah?" Sarah blinked, caught off guard. "Emma, it's not that simple. There are rules, procedures. The state decides what's best for him." "But we're a family," Emma insisted. "And Max found him. Doesn't that mean something? Maybe we're supposed to help him." David, overhearing the conversation, stepped in. "Emma, I understand how you feel. But taking care of a baby is a big responsibility." Emma crossed her arms, her face set with conviction. "I can help. Max will help too. Please, can we at least try?" Her plea struck a chord in Sarah and David. They had been thinking about Noah ever since the rescue, unable to shake the feeling that their family might play a larger role in his story. After a long discussion, they made a decision. Later that day, David called Child Protective Services. "We'd like to apply to be Noah's foster family," he said, his voice steady. The process wasn't easy. Home visits, background checks, and interviews filled the following weeks. But through it all, the Harpers remained determined. Emma took it upon herself to prepare for Noah's arrival. She rearranged her old baby toys, set up a crib in the guest room, and even made a small sign for the door, "Noah's room." Max followed her everywhere, his tail wagging as if he understood the importance of what was happening. Finally, after weeks of waiting, the call came. Noah was being placed with the Harpers on a temporary basis. The family gathered in the living room, their hearts pounding as the caseworker arrived with the tiny boy who had changed their lives. When Sarah took Noah into her arms, he looked up at her with wide, curious eyes. For a moment, the room was silent, everyone captivated by the fragile miracle before them. Emma approached slowly, her hands behind her back. "Hi, Noah," she whispered, holding out a small stuffed bear. "This is for you." Noah reached out, his fingers curling around the bear's soft fur. Max, as if sensing the weight of the moment, padded over and sat beside Emma. His gentle gaze met Noah's, and the baby let out a tiny giggle. It was a sound that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. David placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "We've got this," he said softly. "We'll give him the love he deserves." And so, the Harpers embarked on a new chapter, one filled with challenges and unknowns, but also with hope and love. Life at the Harper household changed dramatically after Noah arrived. The once quiet mornings now began with the soft coos of a baby. And the evenings were filled with the hum of lullabies and the occasional wail for attention. Sarah and David quickly adjusted to sleepless nights, feeding schedules, and diaper changes. Emma became Noah's fiercest protector, never straying far from his side. She spent hours entertaining him with silly faces and stories, and Max was always close by, his golden eyes watching over them like a silent guardian. One afternoon, as Emma played with Noah on the living room rug, she looked up at Max and smiled. "You found him," she said softly. "You made us a family." Max wagged his tail, his eyes soft and understanding. But not every moment was filled with joy. Noah's fragile state weighed heavily on the family. Despite their best efforts, he was slow to eat and often woke up crying, his tiny body trembling as if still haunted by the trauma of his past. Meanwhile, the investigation into Noah's parents continued. Officer Daniels called regularly, updating the Harpers on the progress. "We've found a few leads," Daniels said one evening as Sarah held the phone. "It looks like Noah's parents were involved in a custody dispute that turned violent. We're still piecing together what happened, but there are signs they might have been taken against their will." Sarah's stomach churned. "And Noah?" she asked, her voice trembling. "It's possible he was left behind intentionally," Daniels replied. "Someone might have thought the drain would keep him hidden until they could return. Or until they couldn't," Sarah murmured, her heart breaking at the thought. After the call, she joined David and Emma in the living room, where Noah lay sleeping in his crib. "They think his parents were taken," she said quietly. "He might have been left to protect him." David placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll do everything we can for him, no matter what." One night, just as the family was beginning to settle into a routine, A loud knock echoed through the house. Max sprang to his feet, barking fiercely as David rushed to the door. A man stood on the porch, his face obscured by the shadows of the night. "I'm here for the boy," he said, his voice low and menacing. David's heart pounded as he stepped outside, closing the door behind him to shield his family. "Who are you?" he demanded. The man didn't answer. Instead, he took a step forward, his posture tense. "Give him to me, and no one gets hurt." Inside, Sarah clutched Noah tightly, her mind racing. Emma crouched next to Max, her hands gripping his collar as the dog growled low in his throat. David stood his ground. "You need to leave," he said firmly. "Now." The man's eyes narrowed, but before he could make another move, the sound of sirens pierced the air. Blue and red lights flashed down the street as a patrol car pulled into the driveway. The man bolted, disappearing into the night. When Officer Daniels stepped out of the car, his face was grim. "We've had reports of someone matching that description," he said. "Looks like he's connected to Noah's case. We'll keep an eye on the area." As the officers drove away, David and Sarah exchanged a look of relief mixed with unease. They had narrowly avoided danger, but the encounter left them shaken. Max settled back at Sarah's feet, his eyes never leaving the front door as if to say, "I'm watching." The Harpers knew the road ahead would be filled with uncertainty. But with Max by their side and their love for Noah growing stronger each day, they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The morning after the intruder's appearance, the Harper household felt different. The sunlight streaming through the windows couldn't quite chase away the lingering shadows of fear. But even in the wake of that harrowing night, there was a newfound determination in the air. David installed extra locks and a security camera on the front porch, while Sarah made arrangements to meet with a social worker to discuss their concerns about Noah's safety. At the heart of it all was Max, who rarely left Noah's side. Wherever the baby went, Max followed, whether it was to the living room for playtime, to the kitchen for feedings, or even to the nursery at night. He lay by the crib, his ears alert to every sound, his golden eyes glowing with quiet vigilance. Days turned into weeks, and Noah began to flourish under the Harpers' care. His once fragile body grew stronger, his cheeks filling out with a healthy glow. His giggles echoed through the house, a sound that brought smiles to everyone's faces. Emma was his constant companion, and their bond deepened with each passing day. She taught him to stack blocks, read him bedtime stories, and even shared her most prized stuffed animals. One afternoon, as they played in the backyard, Noah reached out and grabbed a lock of Emma's hair, tugging gently. She laughed and leaned closer. "You're my brother now," she whispered. Her voice filled with love. Max wagged his tail, as if in agreement. Just as the family was settling into this new rhythm, Officer Daniels called with startling news. "We've located Noah's father," he said. "He escaped captivity and contacted us. He's recovering in a nearby hospital." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "And Noah's mother?" Daniels hesitated. "We're still searching for her. But Noah's father wants to meet him." The room fell silent as the Harpers processed the news. Emma was the first to speak. "Does this mean Noah will have to leave?" David placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We don't know yet, sweetheart. But whatever happens, we'll make sure he's safe." A week later, the Harpers brought Noah to the hospital to meet his father, a gaunt man with kind eyes that lit up the moment he saw his son. "Noah," the man whispered, his voice breaking as tears streamed down his face. "My boy." Sarah carefully handed Noah to him, her heart aching as she watched their reunion. The baby stared at his father curiously before reaching out to touch his face, his tiny fingers brushing away the tears. The man looked at the Harpers, his voice thick with gratitude. "Thank you for saving him. Thank you for keeping him safe." David nodded, his voice steady. "He's a part of our family now, too. We'd do anything for him." In the weeks that followed, the investigation into Noah's mother continued. Though her whereabouts remained unknown, the Harpers worked closely with Noah's father to ensure the child's safety and well-being. Through it all, Noah's place in the Harper family remained steadfast. They formed a unique bond with his father, one built on mutual respect and shared love for a little boy who had brought them together. Max, ever the guardian, continued to watch over Noah, his loyalty unwavering. One evening, as the family sat together in the living room, Emma turned to her parents. "Does this mean Noah will have two families now?" Sarah smiled, pulling her daughter close. "Yes, sweetheart. And that just means more people to love him." The story of Max and Noah became a symbol in Willow Creek, a testament to the power of instinct, kindness, and the unbreakable bonds that form in the face of adversity. Years later, as Noah grew older, he would often sit with Max, stroking the golden retriever's fur as he listened to the tale of how they found each other. "You saved me, Max," Noah would say, his voice filled with gratitude. And Max, as if understanding every word, would let out a soft bark, his tail wagging in quiet affirmation. Together, they had turned a moment of darkness into a lifetime of light.